How you doing, folk? Scotty. So I'm pretty sure I've done a response to this before, and a lot of people don't seem to understand it. It's basically why America sucks so much or something like that.
It's really hard to comprehend just how rich we are. We have 18 million people who are millionaires. American households own about $100 trillion in wealth, an almost unthinkable amount of money. Okay, so America is the richest country ever. But there's a curious paradox. Most Americans actually have a much worse standard of living than people who live in poorer countries like Germany or Finland or Britain, but how can that be?
So folk, it's rather debatable what he's basically trying to tell you. He's going on about the richest country. Well, what does he mean by rich? If he's talking about wages, if he's talking about how much you're earning, that isn't what wealth is. So therefore, when you're talking about your standards of living, the material possessions you can buy with it and stuff like that, I'm not saying that there isn't a problem in the United States today. Of course there is. You know, the country is in shit state, and they love to turn to these countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland. And of course he mentioned something today with Great Britain. If you were to look at Venezuela, where they're sitting there with all that paper currency, yeah, very good. They've got all that paper currency, but they were dumping it. It doesn't matter how much paper money that they've got. In other words, they could barely even buy one toilet roll. And that happened simply because the fact that the currency devalued so much is how much you can exchange with it, because that's all money is. Money's just merely an exchange for the things that you want. You know, Americans living in big fancy houses with big massive televisions and all sorts.
Americans get significantly worse services because our tax dollars don't fund them. So of course our services are worse.
This is the same argument the socialists used in this country, that the NHS is underfunded. The NHS has been overfunded. It's been getting billions and billions poured into it each and every single time. The NHS has been faced with all these problems ever since its inception, all the way back to the 1950s, where you see all the articles where it states about how there's chronic hospital staff shortages, hospital bed shortages, the long waiting lines and all the rest of that, right? Is the fact that in every passing decade that you've seen of the NHS, all they've done is used up the same old excuses to try and brush under the carpet, to pretend that the failures, no, or of course just to say, oh, it was all the fault of the Tories. You know, it's just underfunded. You can see for the NHS budget, only for a slight period, you've seen slight stagnation, probably around 2013 or something like that, for about, 2 or 3 years. You know, and the NHS funding's just been going up and up, for the past decade or so, because it's really just an excuse to say, oh, it's not getting enough funding, therefore that's the reason for its failure. But as I've pointed out many times before, folk, you cannot operate anything efficiently if you don't have price fluctuation. These people don't even bother to study why that is. They've never studied prices. They don't understand anything at all today with the economic calculation problem. They don't understand why socialism failed to begin with. And that's the case with the NHS. As a result of the free at the point of use, we were faced with all the chronic shortages of the hospital staff, the hospital beds, the long waiting lines, the misallocation of valuable scarce resources, basically the crux of the argument with that of the economic calculation problem causing surplus waste problem. It's just a case it's not enough tax dollars. No. It's not a case that it's not enough tax dollars, folk. They like to pretend to you that the United States healthcare system is somehow strongly privately operated. Be damned, folk, because I'm showing you yet again, your entire private sector is all regulated by the state, and these same people were the same folk who were running around telling you a myth. They kept on telling you the same myth, and it was the same myth in Great Britain. They kept on telling you, oh, the unregulated markets caused the banking crisis, or they says to you that somehow, oh, the banks were unregulated. What were they talking about? The banks were all regulated. The entire private sector was all regulated. And it's partly the reason for why you're seeing that mess in the United States today. I just earlier on had somebody says to me in a sarcastic manner about, oh, yes, that would be good, getting rid of the NHS and ending up with the neglect that you see in the main American healthcare market, where people are left to die as a result of the neglect. Quite convenient that you would point that sarcasm out. Well, first of all, I don't support the main American healthcare market because, well, I've got a whole video that explains why the American healthcare market costs are through the roof. But the second point is the fact that the NHS does exactly that. More than 9,000 avoidable cancer patient deaths happen every single year because of the NHS. That's avoidable. Never mind all those with heart disease problems and all sorts. Right? That's just the truth of the NHS. And it's always been struggling. It's been struggling ever since its inception.
You get what you pay for, said the cartoon dog to the other cartoon dog. And while you might think the reason American tax dollars don't fund as many services is because we pay lower taxes than other countries, that's not even true. When you add federal, state, local, and sales taxes and include other costs and services that our taxes don't cover but other countries' taxes do, like our uniquely high health insurance premiums, you'll find that Americans actually give away more of their wages than most of the developed world.
He basically thinks it's a case that the more tax that you pay, higher standards of things and stuff like that. Well, if that was the case, then how come billions and billions or so many years has been pulled into the NHS and the same failures just kept on going? Right? It's nothing at all to do with how much tax you're flinging at something. They just think it's a case of just, we take more money and fling more money at the problem. It ends up like a bottomless pit. In fact, it basically is like that. No doubt that is the case in a lot of places like California and stuff like that, which, how convenient. So many of the Californians are fleeing for the sake of places like Texas. Why? Because they've got lower taxes. Hundreds and thousands of people fleeing California for their life. I don't blame them, to be perfectly honest with you. That through all their good intentions, they're faced with dire consequences. Why do you think these places are ending up in complete and utter shit state? Because socialists don't live in the real world. I'm not saying that to be nasty. I'm saying it because it's the truth. They don't live in the real world and fail to acknowledge the damage that's caused through the higher taxes. These Scandinavian countries are nothing at all what they want. These people want to, as they call it, keep the private sector in check. And I've told you that many times before, folk. Their private sectors, they strongly deregulated their markets. In 2001, Denmark had strongly deregulated their market, right? And they stormed past 2008 without a problem. It's the higher taxes that are crippling them. Again, socialists will look at everything for face value. So in other words, they'll look at the unemployment rate for face value. They only look at the official figures, like coming for the government, but they don't acknowledge the difference between your official figures and your real figures. And it just happens to be that the real figure of unemployment is much higher than their official figures as a consequence of the higher taxes. And how do you know that they've got a severe lack of productivity in their domestic economies? Because what higher prices signal is basically today with a shortage. Now, don't get me wrong, there has been an inflationary crisis that will naturally drive the average prices of everything up, and you can't afford to produce in a country where you're being crippled with super high taxes, which is the very reason why, as I've pointed out so many times before, Kongsberg Automotive in Norway is left with about 5% of their workforce in Norway because they're, exporting the jobs across the countries like China, Mexico, the United States. They live in this utopia where they seem to think countries like Norway can get away with an infinite amount of just wealth redistribution.
In Canada, for a married worker with 2 kids, all of the previously mentioned costs combined, from taxes to health insurance premiums, make up only 11% of the average wage. In the UK, it's just about 26%. Meanwhile, once you tack on the cost of our outlandish health insurance premiums, you're spending a whopping 43% of your paycheck.
Do you want to know what's convenient about that, folk? One of the main reasons for why your healthcare costs all there in the United States got out of control was because the United States federal government was to blame for it. Basically, one of the main reasons was introducing insurance for bloody well everything. Insurance is not so much a bad thing insurance is a good thing, right, is because they started introducing it for all sorts that is so unnecessary. And that's the difference between the main American healthcare market and the secondary healthcare market in the United States that know a lot of people or know about, which is basically direct primary care. Direct primary care, they simplified it by getting rid of 80% of the health insurance, and as a result of that they were able to dramatically reduce Americans' healthcare costs. He's basically trying to simplify this down to an argument between things like the NHS and the main American healthcare market, as if that's the only two options you've got. The main American healthcare market is not a capitalist healthcare market at all. A capitalist healthcare market's a free market in healthcare. In the United States main American healthcare market, that isn't a free market at all.
In real reality, Americans keep much less of what we own than in other countries. In other countries, their government takes a bit more tax, but then gives that money back to their citizens in the form of healthcare or job support, or a general safety net for all vulnerable citizens, no matter how dusky they are.
And there you have it, folk. He doesn't understand that it doesn't just come from taxpayers' money. So how the British people compensate, or how government compensates, shall I say, the tax isn't going to entirely pay for the NHS, so how they compensate, right, is by cutting back elsewhere in the economy. They don't understand the saying, the government can't give you without taking for another first. So they've not got a concept of that. They think it's just a case that, oh well, it just comes for taxpayers' money, that's it, and therefore it's more affordable. They don't tell you about British costs of living driving through the roof in the name of paying for it. They never look behind closed doors. They never look where the money's coming from. They don't call Britain rip-off Britain for nothing. Your cost of living is extortionate, all in the name of paying for the so-called free healthcare, and it's no free anyhow. And then you've got the consequences again that they don't even bother to look at. And this is another lie that they kept on perpetuating. I'm not talking about Americans, of course, but I'm talking about, people in this country. The NHS is available for everyone. Well, if it's available for everyone, why is more than 9,000 avoidable cancer patients dying every single year? They just brush that under the carpet, pretend that doesn't even exist. He doesn't bother to look at the consequences of the so-called free, right? Because there's no way to ration scarcity. You can't just make scarcity magically disappear. There's only so many hospital beds you've got. And it was just like that short-fatted taku, or whatever you call him, right? Where he doesn't seem to understand the fact that healthcare is not inelastic for the laws of supply and demand. One of the main reasons why the NHS is faced with the crisis that it's got is simply because of the fact that you've got free at the point of use here in this country. And the consequence is that you end up with people on long waiting lists. So they're not getting service. It might, for face value, aye, okay. And it might benefit a certain group of people. Aye, okay. Very good. Well done. What about the people who are being left in a long waiting list? Oh, you've got to wait 62 weeks to see about your back. You understand where I'm coming from, and they just think it's a case, we'll tax the rich then. Well, that is good, but there's one problem with that. When you look at the net worth of the likes of Jeff Bezos as an example, most of that is made up of his assets. It's not made up in money. His money is a tiny fraction of that. So what you going to do? Tax them of their assets? That's the worst kind of theft I can even think of.
So what do Americans get for the money we pay in? Well, sure, we get a crumbling infrastructure, shameful homelessness, and millions of hungry, neglected children.
Mate, you've got to be having a laugh, man. I mean, you're talking about homelessness and all the rest of this. Have you seen the state of California? Because of the super high taxes and crippling people half to death and making it difficult for people to run business. That was all the policies that you were calling out for. And then you have got the audacity to turn around and say, oh, it was all the fault of capitalism. Yeah, is that why they're all fleeing to Texas?
We also get some of the worst services in the developed world. Again, our healthcare. American healthcare is simultaneously the most expensive, the least efficient, and the least effective healthcare system in the developed world.
Right, you've basically made a baseless claim there about the least efficient. Efficiency is really all down to how you use your time and resources and stuff like that. And obviously there is a cost problem, we can acknowledge that fact. At least, of course, you have ration of scarcity to some extent, and that scarce problem has been created by your federal government. But all you need to understand, and I've even provided a video on this before, basically it's to do with the American Medical Association monopoly, a problem created by the government monopolising licensing, the government over-regulating the private sector, the government with its third-party payer system. That's right, the government monopolised the cost in the background that inevitably led to the collusion between the giant pharmaceutical companies and the introduction of insurance for bloody well everything that sent the cost of American healthcare costs soaring way out of control. What do people do because of no get the knowledge? Typically, as they always do, they blame the private sector. They say, oh look, it's private ownership, or they say, oh look, it's earning profits. And if you were to ask them the question, what's the American Medical Association monopoly? I don't know. They don't know. They've not even got a clue. They don't have a Scooby, man. They've not even got a Scooby-Doo. Deer in headlights, man. But these are the same people who want to sit there and, tell you, and they're so adamant and doing so, they say, oh, it's all the fault of private ownership. So folk, all you need to understand is the fact that they just want to blame everything in the private sector. They don't understand for the life of them, as I say, that private ownership's got nothing at all to do with it, or, of course, that to do with earning profits. And some folk are just so fixed in the way that they are that they don't even want to hear the truth.
And in exchange for this extremely expensive, inefficient healthcare system, what do we get? Well, we get some of the worst health outcomes in the developed world. We have fewer hospital beds per capita than people in Turkey or Brunei. Americans have a lower life expectancy than people in Lebanon or Cuba. And in the Mississippi Delta and much of Appalachia, life expectancy is lower than in Bangladesh.
Folk, you can use that same argument in Glasgow. Glasgow became the heart attack capital of the world, and we're sitting here with the NHS. What exactly is his point? The average life expectancy of Glasgow was 56-year-old or something. I laugh at that, but that's worse than the poorest parts of India. He's basically trying to use that as an argument, as if to say, oh well, it's because of the healthcare market. I understand the point, folk. In the United States, there's a serious problem. There is chronic shortages of things like the hospital staff, the hospital beds and stuff like that. We know that, right? But again, it goes down to that argument. Who is it that caused the problem? Who is it that was responsible for the American Medical Association monopoly? You've got the issue with the pharmaceutical companies that got away with a collusion again, federal government with the third-party payer system, the licensing issue, basically a government monopoly over that, or the over-regulation of the private sector. You understand where I'm going with, right? It's not because, oh, here's a private sector, and private companies earn profits.
In fact, in 2017, the United Nations sent a commissioner to West Virginia to document what he saw, and he described, quote, third world conditions of absolute poverty, unquote. We even have a higher infant mortality rate than people in Russia and Serbia. In every single metric, America does worse across the board. So why is healthcare so expensive? Because it's so complicated. You have to look for in-network physicians, schedule an established care appointment, beg for coverage from your insurance company that couldn't care less about you, and that's if you're lucky enough to have good insurance. Compare that to Britain and all of those other evil, socialist-like countries where it's simple. Public hospitals provide free treatment to people who need it.
Right, folk, I don't need to go into the whole thing today with the free healthcare and all the rest of that because I've already touched upon it. I mean, I could go through article after article after article where you see the same common theme. You saw long waiting lines, and really you're only looking at that word for face value. So many bad stories that would break your heart. And if you were to actually work in the healthcare system, it would be even worse. So many lives that they want to save, but they can't do so because, well, it's in tatters. And all he can think of is the word free. I'm not saying to you that healthcare should be something expensive and like what you see in the United States of America today. That's not what I'm saying, right? Folk that are coming into this country and they're getting free hornets. Meanwhile, folk that were born and brought up in this country are basically being sat back in a long waiting list, being neglected for the sake of others. They can't even get their priorities right, man. It really is that pathetic.
The United States spends significantly more on administration than we spend on preventative or long-term health care. That's just not smart.
Who do you think's the fault for, monopolising licensing and doing all sorts in the American healthcare system? Actually, the government directly owns about 49%, about half of it, right? And then when you look at the private sector, which is about 51% or something like that, even when you look at the private sector, the government is all regulated it. Do you know what that means? The government's practically controlling it. It practically is run by the government. That's the very reason why it's so wasteful. That is the reason why you've got all the administration costs and everything. I should also add in the very fact that it's all thanks to the Food and Drug Administration, which is a government regulatory body. It's the government that actually restricted the supply of drugs in the market, basically preventing potential life-saving drugs that could potentially save tens of thousands of people's lives, and then forced you to go through the giant pharmaceutical companies that the government was responsible for creating that collusion. It really is comical.
Okay, we get it. We all know that American healthcare is so much more expensive, you say, but that's the cost of having the freest freedom in God's favorite country.
See if there's anybody out there in the United States of America today who actually thinks the United States is a free country, been living under a rock somewhere. The Americans' rights have been spat all over, trampled all over. You wouldn't even call the United States today this constitutional republic for what it's supposed to be. So many American people out there seem to believe that Abraham Lincoln was their great saviour. The guy was heavily influenced by Henry Clay. He was an Alexander Hamiltonian. He was the one responsible for the creeping corporatism of the next 50 plus years, for the 1860s, right to the rise of the Federal Reserve Central Bank. He was the one responsible for trampling all over, several of America's constitutional rights. But why would socialists concern themselves over the American Constitution? They're not exactly going to care about that now, are they? In fact, they are the ones that want to destroy it. They don't exactly care about protecting that now, do they? Yeah, but you understand the point.
Americans work longer hours than people in any other rich country in the world, and that's not because they enjoy sleep deprivation and not seeing their families for days at a time. It's because they don't want to starve, or freeze, or die. See, America has the least generous job support programs, the least generous family benefits, and the least generous unemployment benefits of any wealthy country. It's one of the only countries on Earth that doesn't guarantee paid time off for vacations. It doesn't even help provide paid time off for parents who just had a child.
So this goes down to the other economic issue, and it's really to do with that of the unemployment and stuff. And like I say, you only have to look at these places like California that have crippled them with high taxes and stuff. The $15 minimum wage that they argued would somehow work, and it never does. After all the government intervention that crippled the American economy or a century-long period, they then blame capitalism for basically what they created. You could fix a lot of these problems, especially a wage problem, and all it requires is basically pushing America through deflation. That basically means to stop the running of this printing press and vastly increase productivity. And do you know what that requires? Strongly deregulating the market and freeing the market up for that of government and cutting taxes. But we have already established the very fact that these people don't want that. Because they don't want that, they basically support more or less what they're complaining about. And that's exactly what narcissism is like. Narcissism is a problem where they've got an inability to self-reflect. They can't do it. It's why narcissists can't self-improve, because they've got an inability to see themselves as a problem. And that's exactly what, a lot of these socialists suffer from. They don't ever want to accept that they were responsible for the mess that they created. They seem to think they can just have free this and free that and free this, that and the next thing, and have all the social security and all the high taxes and all the rest of it, and cripple the market through heavy regulation, all the government intervention, no be faced with all the, economic consequences. Well, that just isn't the reality of how things, operate.
America devotes a smaller percentage of spending on social welfare than any other industrialized economy because, say it with me, socialism is evil.
Correct me if I'm wrong, right, about the welfare state. I'm not entirely sure in terms of the United States, and I suppose it really depends on where you come from. But the biggest contributing factor to America's serious debt crisis, the United States is probably more than $230 trillion in debt. And the reason for why that is largely because what makes up the largest share of the real United States debt is all the unpaid pensions, etc. All the liabilities for bailing out the banks through all the lovely socialism. That's right, the lovely socialism that crippled the United States of America in a soaring inflationary crisis, ripped the arse out their currency. They then turned around and say that socialism is the solution to their problems, even although it was basically socialism that drove their main American healthcare market costs out of control.
Go to Denmark and try telling those happy, healthy families enjoying their paid vacation that their system of government is evil.
First of all, again, these countries like Norway, Sweden and Denmark are not benefiting for the higher taxes. They're not. If they were able to afford, all this sort of stuff that you speak about, why is the United States of America the one subsidising the Scandinavian countries like Denmark for their medical research? But there you go, they can't even afford to even pay for their own medical research. But again, folk, when he says, their system is evil, he seems to think that those countries are strongly socialist. In the sense of, their market freedom, in terms of business economic freedom, they're sitting there with low levels of government regulation. Ask around you, right? Ask all these so-called social democrats that keep bumming their load off about, these Scandinavian countries. The same people who were supporters of the likes of Bernie Sanders and all the rest of that. Would you want to see your American economy strongly deregulated? And I can guarantee you the answer would be a resounding no. And there's the end of their argument, because that is the only reason why those Scandinavian countries are at least faring better off to some extent or another. He doesn't understand that the wealth of the economy comes from that of the private sector.
America's bad at everything because instead of choosing to make life better for people through a public healthcare system or more generous childcare policies or better public transit or programs that allow people to spend more time with their families.
Right, folks, that's more or less all I've got to say on the issue, and what he's basically trying to argue is that it's just a case of nationalising these things and somehow that's going to improve your standards of living. He doesn't acknowledge the fact that through public ownership, which is basically government ownership, and the central planning problem all pertains to that of the economic calculation problem, basically a resource misallocation problem. And the reason why public ownership ends up in a disaster is because what does public ownership entail? Government price controls. It's actually the main reason why the NHS is in shit state. Once you distort the information of profits and losses, there's no chance that you can ration what's scarce. There's no chance that you can operate it efficiently in terms of resource allocation, especially when you're dealing with time and people's lives. And these people always ask, the type of Europeans who favour socialism. They'll never ask people like me, and the reason why they'll never ask people like me is because I don't fit their narrative. That's the reason why they avoid people like me, because they don't like what they hear. They don't like hearing the truth. It's a welcome return. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions you would like to ask, you can fire away in the comments section below, folk. Anyway, folk, cheers for watching. Talk to you later.